All right, guys, how is it going? How was the promises class? Hopefully, you understood a little bit. The things that you did not understood, thankfully, we don't have to focus on them for a while, unless, of course, you're targeting these assignments. If you want to create promisified versions of set timeout, read file, that is hard. Using them is much easier. So let's focus on using them in the syntax that we had learned, and then some other syntaxes. Specifically, we'll understand the async await syntax now. We'll understand why promises might be slightly better, even though I don't think callback hell is the best reason to justify it. But we'll understand what is callback hell, how do promises fix them, what is promise chaining, async await syntax, defining your own async function, and something called rejects and promises, which again, this feel free to ignore if you don't understand how to create your own promise. It'll be very difficult for you to understand what are rejects and promises as well. All right, without any further ado, let's do a quick recap. I'm going to open Replit, but by now I hope you understand how to start a Node.js project locally, and you can run the same code locally as well. The code that I'm going to write is just going to be, one function which you can use as a black box. If you understand how that function works, that's even better. The function is set timeout promisified. This function, if you understand how to write, try to write it out. If you don't understand, that is fine. We will eventually come back to this. This is one thing you can skip for a while because we won't be creating promises anytime soon in the cohort. All right. What did we do here? If you remember, return new promise, function resolve, set timeout, duration, resolve this. Now, if you want to take this as a black box, great. If you want to write it yourself, if you understand it, amazing. If you want to spend like maybe an hour at max Googling this syntax, asking ChatGPT, why does this convert a simple set timeout into a promisified set timeout? You can do that. What is the difference in the end? What does this function do? It does this. Okay, now I can call set timeout promisified, give it a duration, let's say 1000, and call dot then on it. It is a different syntax to do something similar to what set timeout does. And here I can pass a callback function. What would this do? This would call callback after 1 second has passed. Console.log, 1 second has passed. Again, if you don't understand this, it is fine. What you need to understand is this. How can you call a promisified function? How you define a promisified function might take you some time to digest. If I start this after 1 second, 1 second has passed, gets printed. If I increase this to 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 1 second has passed, gets printed. This should have ideally been 5. All right. Again, this is a black box. This is how you call a promisified function. Now, let's understand what is callback hell. Let's say I ask you to write a question, and this can be an independent assignment that you try. The assignment is log hi after 1 second, then log hello after 3 seconds, after step 1, which means hi prints on the screen after 1 second. Uske 3 second baad, after this has printed, then after 3 seconds, print hello. After this is done, then after 5 seconds, print hello there. So this will print after 1 plus 4 seconds, sort of 1 plus 3 equal to 4 seconds. This will print after 1 plus 3 plus 5 equal to 9 seconds. How would you write this code? Assume, promisification doesn't exist. You only have a set timeout function. How would you call this? How would you write the code for it? You might write something like this: set timeout. And here, I'm passing in an anonymous function. I can define it outside as well. I can be like, I can either do this console.log hi, or I can define it outside callback. Console.log hi. And I can pass callback as the first argument. Either is fine, but if I want to show callback hell over here, it might be better for me to use this anonymous function. It is the same thing, right? Rather than giving it the name of the function, I am just copying the whole thing and pasting it over here and removing the name. Removing the name is what makes it anonymous because it does not have a name now. Given I have this, does it run? Let's run it. Seems to be running. Prints hi after 1 second. What was the problem statement? The problem statement was after hi is printed, then print hello after 3 seconds. So after hi is printed, after the control reaches here, what do I want to do? I want to start another timeout, which will again take another anonymous function as input. That I want to run after 3 seconds. What should this print on the screen? It should print hello. Console.log hello. Already, can you see some glimpses of callback hell? Can you guess what callback hell would be? When you have to do one asynchronous call after another asynchronous call is when you can see clear signs of callback hell. It gets nested very quickly. You might say, Harkirat, I will do this. I will pull this outside and just increase this to 3000 plus 1000. And now there is no callback hell, Harkirat. The problem with this is not what the problem statement asked. The problem statement said, okay, after this has printed, only after that should the second clock start. That is what the problem statement asks of you. So you cannot do that. You cannot just pull it out and start it after 4 seconds. You have to wait for 1 second, print this, then start the second clock, which waits for 3 seconds, prints this. And there is a third step also, which again needs to log hello there in this case. And this needs to run after 5 seconds. It will do what it's supposed to do. Let's see. After 1 second, hi gets printed. 3 seconds after that, total of 4 seconds, hello gets printed. 5 seconds after that, total of 9 seconds, hello there gets printed. So things are working as expected. But can you see what callback hell might be? This code looks incredibly ugly. Incredibly ugly is actually an understatement of what this looks. Indentation after indentation after indentation. And you might have a use case where you want to do one async operation after another. Why is this an async operation to revise quickly? Because this doesn't run immediately. Control reaches here. Then, if I put a console.log outside the callback hell, even though control reaches here first, this gets printed first. Then this gets printed, then this gets printed, then this gets printed, which is why all three of these are async operations. This is a synchronous operation. Outside callback hell gets printed first, even though this comes up the chain. Hopefully that is clear by now. Okay, what exactly is an async operation? How can we get rid of this? How can we get rid of callback hell? Do you have an approach in mind? One approach I just shared a while back, which was, again, this is the ugly solution. This is a solution that actually doesn't really have callback hell. At least visually it doesn't. What you can do is set timeout. Step 1 done, 1000. Rather than pushing this function in here anonymously, separately define it. You don't see unnecessary indentation now, right? This prints hi, starts another clock, which calls this function. Prints hello, starts another clock, which calls this function. So, you can argue all day why promises are better or callbacks. This is one, justified reason that people give. If someone asks you in an interview, you tell them callback hell, but you will always get around callback hell by doing this. Promise APIs are just accepted now. People still have opinions on which is better or other. Some people want to do this, some people want to do this. You should understand both. if given a choice, you should implement your async operations using promisification. But, there will always be debates on, which is better. Personal opinion, I think promises are better, just slightly cleaner to, use them. How? Let's see. Let's see the first solution using promises. Given you have the promisified version of set timeout, this is already defined for you. Don't worry about how it does what it does. This is already defined for you. How would you write your code now? Can you guess? I would call set timeout promisified with 1 second of interval dot then the first anonymous function. Again, I can pull this outside. I can define it in an anonymous function. Here, what will I write? I will write console.log hi. And then same thing again, Harkirat. This looks like callback hell only, Harkirat. If you look at it, are we now not increasing? What was the second text? Hello. We are sort of inundating again, right? Set timeout promisified 5000 dot then. We have written the same code using promises, but I don't see a lack of callback hell here. It isn't callback hell, it is then hell, but it is still hell, right? It is still inundation after inundation after inundation. It's very hard to read this as well. So how can you fix this? The answer is, you can take the other approach, which is, define this function outside. The same approach we took over here. That will sort of get rid of, at least this inundation. Visually, it will not look as bad. But let's say I put a restriction on you. I say, you need to use an anonymous operation. I say you need to use an anonymous operation function. So callback hell mein to this is all you can do. You cannot do anything better. If I put the restriction on you, you cannot define functions outside. You have to use anonymous functions. Then you can't get rid of callback hell here. But can you get rid of callback hell here? The answer is yes. And this syntax is going to boggle your head again. But bear with me. This might be some syntax that you might have to digest for now and eventually, understand it better. But what I'm going to introduce now is called promise chaining. When you know you're calling a function which dot then also has another promise inside, another promise call inside, you can either do this, you can either chain calls like this, जैसा हमने यहाँ किया है, or you can chain calls like, let me show you this. Harkirat, syntax super complicated. I agree. But do you see, is this cleaner? Debatable if this is cleaner or not, but it doesn't have the unnecessary indentation. It at least got rid of the unnecessary, what happened here? Offline. It at least got rid of the unnecessary indentation that we had. Let me paste this. Oh wow, Replit is down, or my internet is. No, Replit is down. That's fine. Let me run it locally just to show you. This is the code that I had written. If I run it, it still does what it's supposed to do. Hype gets printed after 1 second. Hello gets printed after 1 plus 3 seconds. And hi there gets printed after 1 plus 3 plus 5 seconds. And visually, it looks slightly better, right? You might, arguable if this is slightly better or not, but this is, the conventional answer you give when someone asks. Let me also open this in Visual Studio Code now. There we go. This is the, you answer you give. If someone asks why a promise is better, you tell, okay, callbacks have callback hell. If you use promise chaining, then, you can have slightly cleaner syntax compared to callbacks. Question is, how is this working, Harkirat? How are you able to put a dot then over here and then a dot then over here? And the answer remains similar to if you have gone through the assignments. In our assignments, we have done something like this. str1 equal to, let's say, Harkirat. To be able to sort this string in our assignments, this is the first assignment of the most basic assignment that we're solving for week 2. We've done this. str1 dot split space dot sort dot join space. Do you remember this from the assignment if you have seen it? If not, let me tell you what this does. It sorts a string. If I write this logic right here, it does this. Let me choose a smaller string here, ASD. It first splits it based on a delimiter. Now I'm throwing too many words at you. I would go to the assignment video where I've solved this. But split it based on a delimiter means it converts ASD into an array that looks like this. The delimiter, the separator here is an empty string, which is why it just converts the whole string into an array. If the delimiter was S, let's say, the delimiter was S, this would have been the final array. We would have separated this specific string based on this delimiter, which is S. A comes over here, D comes over here. That is what the split function lets you do. Then what does sort do? On an array, I repeat, on an array, you can call the dot sort function, which will sort the array. In this case, it will become A, comma, D, comma, S. And then when you call dot join, it simply converts the array into a string, ASD. If I called dot join with a dot, it would have converted the string into something like this. If I called it with dot dot, then it would have converted the string into something like this. But since I called it with an empty string, it just joins the string. This logic that I've written here is how you sort a string in JavaScript. Unfortunately, string doesn't have a sort function like this. But since array does have a sort function, convert the string to an array, sort the array, convert the array back to a string. Can you see how I am chaining calls over here? I know this returns a string and hence this returns an array and hence I can call dot sort on it. I know this returns an array, hence I can call dot join on it. If I want, I can add, dot two lowercase over here because I know this returns a string. This will return something like Harkirat, let's say. And I can call dot two lowercase on it. That will convert this text into Harkirat, making the capital letter over here small. So what have we learned from this? In JavaScript, you can chain function calls. And that is exactly what we're doing here. What does this return? It returns you a promise. It returns you what this function returns. And what does this function return? It returns you a promise, which means I can chain the dot then call over here. This also eventually returns a promise only. Whenever a promise is returned, you can call dot then on it. Similar to whenever a string is returned by a function or an array is returned by a function, you can call dot sort on it. Array is returned by this, you can call dot join on it. String is returned by this, you can call dot lowercase on it. Similarly, in case of promise chaining, we deliberately, rather than calling set timeout promisified here, rather than doing a dot then here, we say I'm just going to return this promise. Handle it outside. This guy says I'm just going to return this promise. Handle it outside. And by chaining the dot thens like this, I've been able to, make the syntax look slightly cleaner by using something called promise chaining. So what have we learned until now? We have learned that callback hell is something bad in JavaScript. It appears in this use case of ours. This is what it looks like. And we got rid of it by promise chaining, by first calling the first function, calling dot then on it, logging hi, and then returning the promise, calling dot then on that, logging hello, then returning the promise, calling dot then over here, simply logging the third thing. No more promisification anymore. Hopefully that is clear. What is this called? This is called promise chaining. Callback hell is done. The next important thing, which will actually make your life much easier. At least this will be much cleaner syntax for you to digest compared to the dot then syntax that we've been using. It's called the async await syntax. The async and await syntax in JavaScript provides a way to write asynchronous code. What is asynchronous code? Everything that we've been writing until now, right? All of this is asynchronous code that looks and behaves like synchronous code. That looks and behaves like synchronous code. It is still async code. It looks and behaves like sync code, making it easier to read and maintain. Async await is just syntactical sugar. I repeat, it is essentially syntactic sugar on top of promises. What does syntactic sugar means? It means it's just a different way to write the same thing. Even though under the hood it uses promises only, it just makes it visually more appealing. For example, this was the assignment that we wrote. What if you could write code like this? No callback hell and no fancy promise chaining. Almost looks like synchronous code only. If you look at it, set time on promisified. After 1 second has passed, console.log high. Set time on promisified after 3 seconds have passed, console.log high. Set time on promisified after 5 seconds has passed, console.log high there. It does the exact same thing as this guy, or even, what we had written before. It does the same thing, but it looks closer to synchronous code. Let's try it out. Let me replace the code that we had written, this promise code that's so hard to read, with this, slightly easier to read async function. What are the two things that we had to learn? What is the slide called? Async await syntax. You can define an async function. The biggest thing here is in front of the function, you have to put the async keyword. Okay, bhai, this function, even though it doesn't look like it returns a promise, I repeat, it doesn't look like it returns a promise. It indeed does return a promise. If you hover over it, you can actually see promise of void is what it returns. Harkirat, how is it returning a promise? Don't worry about it right now. But this, as I said, async await is just syntactic sugar on top of promise. Under the hood, this is actually returning you a new promise only. You don't see it, but if you hover over the types, you will notice it returns you a promise only. If I change this to, return 1, you will see it returns a promise of number. Now, this is very complicated syntax. Don't worry about it just yet. But my point is, okay, even though this is cleaner syntax to look at, under the hood, it is still a promise. Let's run it. Let's see what happens when we run it. Node index.js. After 1 second, hi is printed. After 3 more seconds, hello is printed. After 5 more seconds, hi there is printed. Big question you might ask, Harkirat, is the thread stuck over here? This syntax says await set time on promisified. Does that mean we are awaiting? So the thread is stuck over here and it cannot do anything else? Again, the answer is no. It looks like it. It appears like this is a synchronous function. It appears like, यार ये तो ऐसा कुछ है. So this is, you are waiting here for 1000 milliseconds, then printing this, then waiting here for 3000 milliseconds, then printing this. So the thread is probably, waiting over here. But the answer is no. It is still under the hood a bunch of dot then calls like this only. It's just cleaner syntax for your eyes. Under the hood, it's a bunch of promise calls. How can we confirm that? Let me put a log here. After solve function. If this was a live class, I would have done a poll right now. Solve is getting called. You do a set timeout. Then hi gets printed, set timeout, hello gets printed, set timeout, hi there gets printed. What do you and then this gets printed. What do you think is the order of prints? The, option 1. Hi, hello, hi there, and then after solve function. It looks like this should be the option, if I'm being honest, because you are calling a function which doesn't do any promise, any callback, nothing. I repeat, it seems like this doesn't use promises and callbacks. It seems like it. But as I've said, async await is just syntactic sugar. So option 2 is something that might happen. Ki acha, the control reached here and this is an asynchronous call. So, control then reached here, or, in this case, the control reached the solve function. It is not stuck over here. It is moved on to do other tasks, and hence after solve function gets printed first, then hi, then hello, then hi there. Which one of these two options does your heart say works? Which one of these, given that I've given you some hints, do you think is the right answer? Take a pause over here, try to guess it. I'm going to run it, and moment of truth. After solve function gets printed first, which means option 2 wins here. Why does that happen? Because as I said, it is, if this was a function call like this, or a promise call like this, then what would have you said? Then you would have said na ki ha Harkirat, these two are asynchronous functions. If I convert this back to slightly callback hellish promise calls, in this case it would have been easy to guess कि अच्छा solve gets called, then set timeout promiseified gets called, and this is an async call, भाई. Dot then my control will reach after a long time through the event loop, if you remember, through the call stack. Sorry, not the call stack, through the callback queue. If you remember the architecture, loop JavaScript. If you remember the architecture of JavaScript, specifically asynchronous function calls, some things are handled by web APIs. They would then reach the callback queue and then get pulled to the call stack. If I wrote code like this, you would have hopefully guessed कि अच्छा हाँ भाई set timeout promiseified reaches the web API section, and hence while this is running, the call stack can do its other things, which is why the call stack is printing this. Let's try it out. Let's write a single set timeout that runs after 5 seconds. And we have a welcome to loop afterwards. Does this get printed first, or does this get printed first? Hi get printed. This reaches web APIs. Then welcome to loop gets printed. Eventually from web APIs, it reaches here, and then this gets printed. So async calls happen later on. Here it is slightly easier to guess that happens. In the async await syntax, because it looks so similar to synchronous syntax. I repeat, it looks so similar to synchronous syntax. No dot thens, no callback functions. It feels like the thread will be stuck here, but it isn't stuck. It still does its other things. This still pushes things, to the callback, and they eventually get picked up by the call stack. It just doesn't look like that because this is syntactic sugar. It was meant to, fool the eyes and make it slightly cleaner to look at. All right. That is what async await syntax is. Try to practice a bit, write some functions, some promiseified calls by using this syntax compared to the other one. For example, I could, if you remember from the last class, we created a fs read file async function, which would, return a promise, which would, do a fs dot read file, whatever, a.txt utf8 function, and resolve data that you could use to read a file. For example, await file, read file async. So try this out. Try reading a file's contents given, let's say this is a black box. Just copy paste this if you don't understand how I have promiseified the fs.read file call. But this is exactly what you were supposed to do in the final set of assignments. If you look at the final assignments, it says try to create a promiseified version of set timeout and fs.read file. The answer to this is actually this thing right here. But if you don't understand, it's fine. All right, async await syntax is done. Defining your own async function is something we covered in the class. Again, this And this is exactly what I mean by that. Defining your own asynchronous function, a function that returns a promise. Now this and this are that, but you will not understand this unless you understand what the promise class is. So if you have not understand this since the last week, it's fine. You won't have to write any of this for a few weeks, maybe months. You will have to use it. So make sure you understand this syntax, the async await syntax, and the normal dot then syntax when it comes to using a promise. You don't have to write a promise just yet. Lastly, again, this is only relevant for people who understand how to create functions like these. I haven't shared the whole story of a promise. There is one thing I sort of skipped upon, which is errors. Whenever you use, you call an asynchronous function, right? Whenever it is done executing, it should signal you two things. Has an error happened and the real data. I repeat, जब भी कोई async call हो रही है, it can give you one of two things. Okay, error आया during the async call. For example, let's say this file doesn't exist. Or if the error did not come, then it can return you the data. So usually, any function that is returning a promise can either resolve, which means everything went fine, or can reject. Reject means things did not go fine. For example, in fs.read file, or our read file async function, if you understand this syntax, we are totally ignoring the callback here. I repeat, if I do a read file async dot then console.log, file has been read, and if I run this code, what do you think happens? A.txt does not exist. Let me change this to some random file name that doesn't exist on my file system. What will happen? The control will reach here where error will be something, but I totally ignored the error. I never propagated this error to whoever was calling me. Ideally, whoever was calling me needs to do a dot then. Dot then means everything went fine, or do a dot catch. What does dot catch mean? Which again, I can chain like this. I can chain it like this. I can chain it like this. All, promise calls can chain, specifically at least dot then followed by dot catch can chain like this. This is how you should ideally call an async function, rather than totally ignoring, if something went wrong, let me ignore it. Let's try this first. If I run node index.js, it says file has been read. Can you imagine? Error was there. There was an error, but I still resolved. My promise still resolved. Of course, the data is empty. So if I try to log the data here, it will tell me it is empty. But even though this file doesn't exist, I never propagated this error to whoever was calling me. Versus, if I do this, console.log e, if I say, यार जो promise तो मैंने define किया है, I have defined a promise, and it can resolve or reject. I repeat, this function actually takes two arguments. We have completely ignored the second argument until now, but ideally a promise function can either resolve, which means things are fine, or reject. If error exists, you should reject with file not found. If it does not, if there is no error, then you can resolve the data. So now if I run this, it says file not found. Again, if you don't want to understand how to write a promise right now, it is fine. You should understand how to use it. These 4 lines you should understand. This part, if you don't understand right now, it is fine. How to define your own promise is hard, will take some time and digestion. So don't worry about this, but make sure you understand this. Okay, whenever I am calling a promise, I can get the correct value and get the correct error like this. Every async call, if you look at this read file async call, it returns you some error, returns you some data. You can do whatever you want with that error or data. And similarly, read file async that we have defined should also, if there is some data, then return it. If this file is read, Then whatever data we get, we resolve, we propagate over here. So you can read the data. If it is read right, control will reach here. If it is not read right, if there is an error, control will reach here. So whatever function calls we do from now on, you will see, okay, we use dot then dot catch from time to time. And this dot catch, control will reach here if there is ever a reject from the promise that we are using here. Cool. Let's see this in action again. Let me call this a.txt. This is the code that we're running. Let me make this slightly smaller. If I run node index.js, it says file has been read, and this is the contents of the file. Because I do have an a.txt here. Let me do cat a.txt. You will see it has some contents. So I do have a.txt. I see it over here. I don't have some random file. So if I run this now, node index.js, it says file not found. Control reaches here. It finds an error. It rejects with file not found. This makes the control reach here, and we log that. You can also put, error over here. If I run this, it says error followed by file not found. All right. That is how an error first callback compares to rejects and promises. Callbacks, most of them, some callbacks never fail, right? Set timeout never fails. It'll run after 1 second. If the call stack isn't free, then it'll run after 10 seconds. It will not reject ever. So here you will always resolve. But when you're reading a file, then there can be errors. You should propagate them back to whoever is calling. All right. With that, try to do these assignments. If you cannot, don't worry about it. We will eventually, after let's say a month of digesting other things, come back here and try to understand how can you create your own promise-ified functions. All right. With that, let's end it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.